In today's video, Magnus Carlsen is in total and complete shock as his opponent plays the most insane new opening of all time against him that I'm calling the Armenian Leprechaun. Now, this new opening, it begins with the moves a3 and then rook to a2, the most disrespectful opening ever played versus Magnus Carlsen. But just 2 moves later, the attack begins with the moves h4 and then h5, the alpha 0 h-pawn launching down the board, total and complete disrespect. But Magnus, not to be outdone, on move 15, he sacrifices, yes, the rook on the e3 square, lighting the board on fire. This may be the most insane game you will ever see featuring Magnus. Let's dive right in. All right, in the game, the Armenian GM Aram Hakobyan opens 1a3, Magnus g6, and then rook to a2. Aram, what are you doing versus Magnus? This is your chance to play versus the greatest player of all time in a Titled Tuesday tournament in 2024, and you open with rook to a2? What on earth are you doing? Okay, Magnus, bishop g7. He's trying to play somewhat standard chess. And now Aram on move 3, it is only move 3, h4. This guy is going for the throat right out of the opening. What on earth do these moves have in common? I have no idea. All right, Magnus, knight to f6. Now, surely Aram in this position, he's not going to go h5 because that would just be the most ludicrous idea ever. He's not going to go full Prognanda right here. And turns out he doesn't. d4 is the move, trying to fight for the center of the board. Now Magnus, he castles, getting a very nice King's Indian defense style setup. Now Aram, what is it going to be? So far, all of your moves make absolutely zero sense in conjunction with each other. And what's it going to be right here? Well, on move 5, Aram, he lights the board on fire. You have to know it's coming. h5, here we go. Aram playing a brand new opening idea. This position has never been achieved before in the history of the game. I'm calling it the Armenian Leprechaun. Because, I mean, like Leprechaun, this game is absolutely insane. It's fighting chess. Here we go. All right, Magnus, in the Armenian Leprechaun, what does he do? Well, he takes up the gauntlet. Knight takes h5, inviting white to literally sacrifice the rook on the h5 square for the knight. Now, he doesn't do it in the game. He's got a much more sinister idea in mind right here. He plays the move e4, achieving a beautiful pawn center with pawns on d4 and e4, controlling literally all of the critical squares in the center of the board. He's actually trying to fight for an edge despite opening a3 and rook to a2. Now, Magnus, he's got to find the right way to proceed right here. This is so critical. That knight on the h5 square, believe it or not, is at risk of being lost in this game. Now, you can play, for example, knight to f6, retreating, or d6, controlling e5, but Magnus in the game, he is poking the Armenian bear, and he plays the move d5. Now, why is this move right here so risky? Why is this not recommended? It's simple. White plays the move e5, and now look at this, the knight on the h5 square. It is at risk of being trapped due to the move g4. g4 right now would hit the knight, and the knight has no retreat squares. f4 being covered by the bishop, f6 being covered by the pawn. Aram Hakobyan, are you about to get the lead versus Magnus with your new opening, the Armenian Leprechaun? All right, Magnus, surely he's going to see the threat of g4 here. Surely he's going to play a move like queen d7, guarding g4, maybe f6, counterattacking, maybe c5, counterattacking on the d4 square. Surely the GOAT, the greatest player of all time, is going to see something like these moves, right? If you thought that, you thought wrong. Magnus here, he's poking the Armenian bear. He plays the move rook to e8. Magnus, is this guy literally begging Aram to go g4? Is he begging him to do that, saying, I'm going to win even if I lose the knight on purpose? Was that the idea behind this move? Comment down below if you think you know why Magnus played this move. Personally, I think he's just egging Aram on. There's no way he missed the idea of g4. I think he's just begging white to go for it, and he's going to outplay him anyway. And here Aram does go for it. g4 is the move, effectively winning the knight on the h5 square on the spot. There's nowhere it can go. Magnus, what does he want to do? How does he want to lose the knight? There's no way to keep it alive. All of these squares being covered by, if I can draw arrows correctly, covered by the white pieces right here. Well, in the game, he goes back to the f6 square. Knight to f6. Wait a minute. Magnus Carlsen, did he see all the way into the future? Rook to e8. The idea being, if the e-file is opened up, the rook attacks the king on the e1 square. Was that the idea behind rook to e8, begging on g4 just to go knight f6, letting white take, and then opening up the e-file? Is that the depth of Magnus Carlsen's play? Is that how big his brain is in this game? g4, knight f6, e takes, and then e takes, hitting the king on the e1 square with check. I will never doubt Magnus Carlsen ever again in a game of chess. This guy has ideas for literally everything. Contingency plans on contingency plans on contingency plans. All right, Aram, bishop e3, blocking the attack of the rook. But of course, as we saw in the intro, the inevitable is coming. That rook sacrifice is near. All right, Magnus, c5, counterattacking on the d4 square. A good move, intending knight c6, putting the knight behind the c-pawn. Now, Aram, he sees this. c3, bolstering the d4 square. Now, knight to c6, and Aram in this position plays yet another absurd move in this game. I mean, the absurd moves in the Armenian Leprechaun just keep on coming here. b4, the audacity, threatening b takes c5, but more importantly, threatening the rook lift on the second rank. The rook on move 2, going to the a2 square, now being fully activated. Was that the idea behind Aram in this game? a3, rook to a2, intending a future b4 advance just to lift the rook over to the e2 square? Is that how deep grandmasters think in the game of chess? My goodness, I have no idea. I'm only rated about 2,000 online. This stuff is just way beyond me. All right, c takes, then c takes, and now Magnus, the very critical idea, f5, threatening f takes g4, and also if white takes on f5, the bishop is now activated in the game on the ideal f5 square. A very, very solid move by the GOAT. Now we have g takes, then bishop takes, finally activating that piece. And now, Aram, knight to e2, doing everything he can to develop, to clog the e-file and so on. But of course now, the rook lift to the e2 square is not a possibility, at least for right now. And now, it is move 15, only move 15. And Magnus Carlsen, what does he do right here? He cannot resist, like a moth to a flame, like my dad to the TV show Naked and Afraid, and like me to Big Booty Latinas here. Magnus Carlsen, he just cannot resist, and he plays the move. Rook takes e3, lighting the board on fire. And by the way, this is the strongest move in the position. It's not just for show. Magnus Carlsen calculating everything out in advance, knowing you sack the rook on the e3 square, white takes back, and then the king is so vulnerable on the e1 square, not to mention white's development being absolutely atrocious in this game. Rook takes e3, f takes, and then queen to e7, targeting the weak pawn on the e3 square. Although I do want to point out queen g5 was just a little bit stronger than queen e7. The point being, you attack the pawn, but you also pressure the g2 square, stopping bishop g2 ideas in the future, and that will be very, very important as we go along in this game. Now here, Aram, knight b to c3 is the move, trying to develop, but missing the chance to go bishop g2, guarding the f3 square, which, as we're going to see, was very, very important. Magnus, he flies in with the queen. Queen takes e3, a surprise to no one, winning the pawn, now winning the bishop and the pawn in return for the rook, not to mention having the devastating attack against the white king. I'd say so far, the rook sack was fully justified. Now Aram, queen d2, trying to get those queens off the board. If he can succeed in that plan, getting the queens off the board and heading to a queenless middle game / endgame, whatever you want to call it, Aram would be doing swimmingly here. So of course, Magnus the GOAT, he sees this, he knows this, queen to f3, sliding over and punishing Aram for not going bishop g2 earlier, which would control the critical f3 square. Now here, of course, the rook on the h1 square, it is under attack. It must go somewhere. You cannot lose that rook right here. That would be game over. So here, Aram, rook g1, sliding the rook over, but it turns out this is a critical mistake. The rook lift, rook to h4, shockingly, absurdly enough, was actually the way to go. Instead, rook g1, and don't ask me to try and explain why. That is the better move right here. This stuff is just completely beyond me in this weird opening. What did I call it? The Armenian Leprechaun. All right, rook to e8. Magnus sliding his rook over, activating every single piece in the attack, developing, pressuring the king, pressuring e2. Everything is just closing in on the white position. Now, bishop g2, pressuring the queen on the f3 square. Queen to h5 is the move, sliding back, and then king to f1. So far, the Armenian GM Aram Hakobyan, he seems to be hanging on in this Title Tuesday Blitz game. But Magnus, he is just getting started here. Bishop G4, pressuring the weak knight on the E2 square. Everything right here is closing in on that knight. Of course, Aram is going to have to respond. And what does he play? He plays the move Queen to F4, sliding up. For right now, the knight on the E2 square is defended by 3 pieces. Therefore, there is no real attack on the piece yet. So, Queen to F4, activating the queen, being active, pressuring the bishop, and so on. Not the worst idea in the world. Now, Magnus, Bishop H6, reactivating his bishop to a better diagonal, pressuring the queen on the F4 square, and suddenly the queen is looking very, very vulnerable. I mean, where can it go? You can't go on this diagonal. You can't go here. You can't go there. You can't go, there's very, very few good squares that you can go to with the queen. And here, he tries to launch forward to the F6 square, queen to F6, but this is a massive mistake. Instead here, you have to play the counterattack on the opponent's queen, rook to H1 to stay in the game and keep the game somewhat even. Instead, queen to F6 chosen in the game. And here Magnus, the Punisher, he punishes this immediately. Bishop G5, pressuring the queen. Where can you go with the queen? If you fly too far away to say D6, the attack on the white king is just too strong. Therefore, he flies back to the F2 square, queen to F2, sliding back, trying to guard the king, making a little mini fortress with these pieces right here. But Magnus, he's not done. Bishop to E3, the skewer on the queen and the rook on the G1 square. Now, what can you do as white here? What is the idea? If you like puzzles, pause the video right now and try to find the absolutely insane idea for white right here in this position. And by the way, if you want to learn directly from me, a roughly 2,000 ELO player online, my students online are getting insane results. I have students gaining literally 200 to 400 plus ELO in a single month, like my student Aiden LeBrock gaining 200 plus ELO, winning 19 out of his last 20 online games, or my student Umar going from 1,100 to over 1,500 ELO on chess.com Rapid in the month of August 2025. If you want results like that, drmikechess.com. Links also down below in the description and pinned comment of this video. Now, continuing right here, what is the idea for white in this position? Of course, if you move the queen, you just lose the exchange and effectively the game. Therefore, Aram Hakobyan, he digs deep in this Armenian Leprechaun opening, and he plays the absolutely ludicrous, insane, mind-melting move. Knight takes D5. What have you done? You're giving up the queen, but oh boy, there is an idea here. Magnus, he takes the queen, but then knight to F6, the triple royal fork on the rook, the king, and the queen. Aram counterattacking with the fork on the king and the queen, winning the queen in response and keeping the game alive. All right, king to F8, the king slides over. Knight takes H5, bishop takes G1, winning the rook. Now here, knight to F6, keeping the knight alive and counterattacking on the rook on the E8 square. Now, rook takes E2 is the move for Magnus, getting the rook out of harm's way, winning the knight on the E2 square. Now we have rook takes, bishop takes, and then king takes G1. Okay, the pieces are flying off the board, and finally, let's slow down and take inventory. We have an endgame right here. Of course, Magnus, he's going to win this pawn. Aram, he wins this pawn. Let's do 2 more moves here. Knight takes and bishop takes. In this position, Magnus, of course, he's got the 3 pawns on the king side. However, the game is not over yet, as Aram has the potential for a pass pawn on the queen side, which, by the way, is a little bit further away from the defense of these kings on the F8 and the G1 squares, meaning the Armenian Leprechaun opening, it is still fighting in this game. It is not over. All right, H5, Magnus gaining space on the queen side. A4, Aram channeling the spear of Conor McGregor, fighting till the very end in this game. King to E7, knight D4, dropping back with the knight, and now bishop to F3, a very annoying pin on that knight. If you move the knight to anywhere other than these 2 squares, you lose the bishop. Now here, Aram, he's got to find some way to deal with this threat, and he plays the move B5, which unfortunately for him does not deal with the threat, and Magnus Carlsen F5, attacking the pinned piece. Of course, you don't lose a piece. Knight to C5 is the move, but now as more and more pieces come flying off the board, the advantage of these 3 pawns on the king side becomes greater and greater. But of course, Aram, in this Armenian Leprechaun opening, he's fighting till the very bitter end. G5 is the move. Knight to A5, dropping back. King D6, Knight C4, King C5, Knight to E5, H4, Knight F7, targeting the weak pawn on the G5 square. Both sides in extreme time pressure right here, right now. All right, G4, King to H2, F4, the triple pawn avalanche marching down the board. Knight to H6, Aram continues fighting until the bitter end. Now, G3, King to H3, F3. Can you stop these pawns? Aram continues fighting. Knight to G4, eyeing the F2 square, maybe eyeing a sacrifice on the F2 square if F2, for example, F2, Knight takes, G takes, King to G2 might be the idea. But instead here, Magnus, simply G2. There is no sacrifice right here. King to H2, and then finally Knight D2. And in this position, there is nothing you can do at all to stop the idea of G1 promoting to a queen. For example, Knight E3 is met by G1 promoting to a queen and a checkmate in very, very short order. And for that reason, in this position right here, after Knight D2, Aram Hakobyan, despite playing the most diabolical, disrespectful, audacious new opening of all time, A3, Rook A2, and then H4 and H5, way back in this position right here, he's forced to resign on the spot to Magnus Carlsen. All right, Chess YouTube, hope you enjoyed this video. I sure did myself making this, so hopefully you got as much fun as I did right here. If you did, go ahead and smash that like button, comment down below. What do you think? I mean, do you want more new opening videos like this one, or do you hate me for this video? I mean, whatever it is, comment down below. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of mixed opinions on this. And by the way, if you are trying to improve at online chess and you're kind of struggling and not making the progress that you want, I do have a free online chess community where I'm basically going in there and answering everyone's questions daily, analyzing everyone's games daily that they post, giving you guys free opening courses. I'm kind of doing everything I possibly can right now for free to help you guys improve at online chess. I know some of you are going to say, oh, this guy must be a scam or whatnot. I'm literally doing everything I possibly can to help you for free. So that's my pitch. Join if you want. If you want to gain 100 to 200 to even 400 plus ELO in a single month, like my best students so far. I'm new at this, but I seem to be pretty good at coaching students so far. If you want results like that, drmikechess.com. You know, that's all I got. Join if you want. Don't join, whatever you want to do. And as always, I wish you the best of luck in your chess improvement journey in 2025 and beyond. And God bless, and I'll see you in the next video.